So today we're going to talk about language. Language is a big thing. I think every time I say this is a big thing, no, but this is a big thing. Linguistics is a word in itself. It's it's more than a subfield in psychology. It's a field actually. I think you can major in linguistics at NYU, right? And yes, and linguistics is one of the most interesting and rich fields in cognition in psychology because it touches so many stuff at the same time. It's very close also for historical reasons. It's very, I think it's one of the closest fields to philosophy inside psychology, and is one that suffers the problem of familiarity and unfamiliarity that I've talked about. And if you haven't yet watched my last lecture, the one before, the one that I talk about the macro questions on attention and memory, especially in the end. So please watch it. It's an important lecture, and I talk there about the unsolvable problems of trying to understand an unfamiliar realm, human cognition, while at the same time suffering from the biases of a familiar realm. So language is one of the most problematic ones, because we feel absolutely familiar with language. We are all very proficient in language, not only in communication. We will see soon why it's not the same. And by trying to understand what's language and how it works, which is completely unfamiliar, the feeling, the assumption that we all have, and I identify with that feeling, is that the study of language, not communication, the study of language is a huge window to understand human cognition. Also, for historical reasons that in the end of this lecture we'll see, linguistics have attracted very interesting and intensive thinkers. And there is a lot of politics involved in the sociology of science of linguistics that we won't have time. I will finish language today, and that's not fair, because language deserves more than one. Well, so many things deserve more than one. So, first of all, I suppose that many of you, or some of you, major or minor in linguistics, or have studied linguistics, and probably know more than I do. For me, linguistics have been one of those to-do priority things that I want to do once in my life to understand better. It really attracts me. There is so much there. And every time I tell myself, well, I must read more, I must understand more. But I am not an expert in linguistics, and I'm sure that those of you that know more than I, please feel free to step in, to correct me, to add, if you are here now or if you watch it later. So this lecture will be it's not only an oversimplification of the main stuff, it's also my selected highlights of things that I would like to talk to you about. All right, so language is not communication. Language is a structure that we use to communicate with ourselves and with others. Language is how we organize the world. Like we talked about the fact that we cannot imagine anything that we know about ourselves or others if we take memory out. Language the same. We think through language, we perceive through language, we understand through language, inside and outside. So communication can be achieved without language. Animals is one example. We'll see soon whether they have language, they don't have language. The common assumption is that they don't, but they communicate, of course. Amoebas communicate. The simplest forms of organisms, single cell organisms communicate chemically. If you put amoebas with other things around, they will do phagocytosis to other things, and they will not try to eat each other. Somehow they communicate chemically or. So communication is one instance of language. And one big question that I think that I find the most interesting or intriguing or important is whether language is a cause or a consequence of what we are. We'll come back to that later. So cause or consequence should be the main cloud hovering question above everything we'll talk today. So language organizes thoughts and narratives. It's perhaps one of the clearest expressions of our need to make order of the universe, to perceive control, to perceive. I talked so much about metaphysics and our emotional need and attraction to it, to order. So language is a on the face huge expression of that, because language, the structure of language organizes, first of all, it discerns what are factors, what are unitary concepts, what are actors, and it connects between them a long time. It allows us to feel, to perceive coherence. It gives us tools to ascribe cause and effect among time. So the field of linguistics is as I said, a huge field, and it's, for those of you that don't know it, it's a very formalized. The tools are strongly based on logic, on logical thinking, on formalization of models. So as we can see here, that language can be non-verbal, non many things, many forms, and it is mostly used for communication, but not only, also communication within ourselves. All right. So it's accepted to say that language, the way we will define today, is a unique human behavior, human tool, and that goes back to the familiar and unfamiliar problem. That animals, they don't have language. They communicate, but they don't have what we'll see soon, the basic structure, the basic conditions that language must have. And that's a problem because in other fields, we do have animal models. Animal models is like, for instance, we want to understand decision-making. We want to understand neurophysiology. We want to understand memory. We feel comfortable to confine a specific question that can be translated to the behavior of a monkey or a rat. And then we have animal models. And for language, we don't have. That's also one of the reasons why it's so close to philosophy. I said before that philosophy constrains itself mostly to familiar realms or perceived familiar realms, while science dares to explore also unfamiliar realms, and animal models are extremely important for that, and we don't have it in language. So many examples of how animals communicate. So they sing. So lately it was discovered that not only birds, but also mice, they have the same patterns of singing, listening, and singing. So birds, we can say, we observe it, that they seem to sing and listen. They react to the surrounding. So mice do the same, apparently. Insects, they also communicate by bird songs have been used to study language, but okay. So many social insects, they communicate by movement, by patterns of movement. That in bees there is a lot of research about it, and very complex movements, recurrent ones, and ants also, and they achieve rich communication. So let's go through what is accepted, consider the main properties, the sine qua nons of language, of human language. So arbitrariness is the first one, meaning that we don't seem to be able to connect straightforwardly between the basic blocks of language, if it's sound, of human language, if it's sound or letters, to its meaning. So some sounds in human language, onomatopoeias, they do have, they do feel connected. So I don't know, bark or swish or maybe jump, I don't know. But most of the words, they don't seem to be connected to its meaning, even across languages. So the word house in English doesn't feel any houseness, or in German, house also, or in Hebrew, it's bait, in Arabic, dar, in French, maison, casa. So that's arbitrariness. The same for written language. The letters, the forms, there are written languages that they do have more connections. So hieroglyphs, or I think some Eastern alphabets also are drawing based, but most don't. Animals, their communication seems to us less arbitrary. We feel that we can understand when an animal is angry, is trying to communicate a threat or something else in the way they emit sounds or their body language. Smell, but they communicate with smell. That for us, there is no connection between the meaning of the message and the building blocks of the message itself. The second one is productivity, meaning that we can achieve endless, later we'll see an example, endless, valid, meaningful pieces of communication with the building blocks that we have. If it's 20-something letters, if it's our phonetic, it's not many. If it's our phonetic sounds or syntactic entities, so we have noun, we have verb, we have object, we have subject, predicate, we have adjectives. With few building blocks, letters or style, we can communicate endlessly. We can build whatever we want.
Someone was raising their hand to ask a question.
Yes. You can do it, and thanks God, but you can, please feel free, just interrupt me in the middle, just enter and talk. Yes, who wants to ask?
I think that was me. And then May sent a message right then into the chat anyway. So I figured I'd do it in the chat, but I'll ask it. I was asking, so is language complexity?
Hi, Tristan. Now I connect your face to your voice.
Hi, Ricky. Good to see you. Yeah, okay, so I was asking, so it seems like language complexity is associated with the arbitrariness, which seems kind of counterintuitive or ironic, right? Because to what extent do you think it's fair to say that language complexity is associated with arbitrariness?
Well, complexity, I would associate more with productivity. The arbitrariness, meaning the lack of obvious connection between the building blocks and its meaning, why it allows sophistication or complexity. It's a good question. I don't know why did you ask? Why do you think it's connected?
Well, because when you brought up the animals, about how animal languages tends to be less arbitrary than human language, I just thought that, because animal language tends to be more directed towards like accomplishing specific goals within a given moment, like maybe say in a forest, an animal might let off a specific kind of screech to signal to others that a specific predator is coming. So, which has a sort of a direct purpose. It's like it's a singular purpose, which is a little simpler than human language, which sets out to do more complex, abstract things like describe emotions or.
I see. We'll get to the point. You're raising a point that we'll get in two slides. Perhaps, well, if we were, I am going with what you're saying, perhaps if we were constrained to being able to form meaningful messages by building blocks that are connected to the message, maybe we could have much less options. But that's hindsight explanation. Why? Let's leave it like this. After in four slides, let's go back to this question. But for now, this is a description of a fact, not an explanation of its use. But let's go back in a minute, okay?
Okay.
So arbitrariness. We observe that we don't seem to connect the building blocks to the message. Productivity is the endless ability to create endless alternative possible messages. Regularity is the idea that there are rules that are implicitly agreed, and that's a condition. There is a structure or format that must be followed. And then discreteness is the distinction between the units. So the units, be that letters, be that phonetic sounds, they are very different one from the other qualitatively, not quantitatively. Like there is no, between a and o, there is no gradual change, right? And they are sparse. We have few. It's like with the DNA. Like we have 4 nucleotides, right? We have cytosine, guanine, adenine, and thymine. So with these 4 few blocks, the entire universe of living organisms can be expressed. So the same for languages. And we know the feeling of when we learn a new language, how difficult it is to learn a new sound. We all have accents when we speak our not. I have accent for any language, even my mother languages, because I have a mix of accents. But for us, it's difficult to learn a new. People that speak R, they find very difficult to say R or which are different variations of the same letter in different languages. And displacement. What I think is connected to what you said, Tristan. Sorry. So displacement means that the messages the human language can construct infinitely non-existent realities. So, like Tristan said, animals seem to us that they are constrained to now and near future. But we are not aware of animals communicating hypothetical meanings or abstract meanings. I suppose that those of you that own cats and dogs, but I think cats, would absolutely disagree with me that cats can be much more hypothetical and surrealistic than even human beings. But when we observe animal communication, we don't have any hint of them saying something about the past, the future, maybe when they want something, which is an image, a representation of a future event, they know how to communicate. But even if there is a little bit, human language can build any kind of meaning. Easily something that doesn't exist. Something absolutely new that a receiver will understand. And it's endless. It's beyond space. It's beyond time. Now, to what you said, Tristan, how arbitrariness allows us to achieve this complexness, I don't know. But let's think about it. Maybe if it comes back to, well, the simplest, the obvious answer is what I think intuitively, what I said before. If we had to have only onomatopoeic building blocks, we would be constrained. I don't know.
Just
yes.
quickly, also, because I also feel like just from like an evolutionary perspective too, complex language is very helpful, but arbitrariness isn't, because I feel like it takes up more brain space and sort of, I mean, I'm not sure, I don't know how the brain anatomy connects exactly to language production, but I also feel like even though complexity is associated with evolution and it's very helpful for, like, you know, the development of the human experience and things like that, arbitrariness is like weirdly, it just takes more mental capacity to be able to make the complexity make sense.
I agree with you. I don't know about the brain stuff. I don't know if it means anything to find something in the brain. Probably one of the first areas that were found is the Broca site. But that's how I'm diverging. But yes, I agree with you, because the fact that it's arbitrary, it means that we need a mediation. We need, it makes it more complicated to communicate. And your question is why it evolved to be arbitrary. Why? So we agree that when we observe, or people from linguistics have agreed that when they observe human language, it is arbitrary. And you ask why it evolved to, what's the advantage of being arbitrary? I am going to ask this question and try to see. Although, as I have insisted ad nauseum with you guys, the fact that we have a given attribute, quality, configuration doesn't mean that it's the best option possible throughout evolution. Okay, but let's not go back to that. But I'm sure someone thought about it deeply. I'll search for it. Remind me, Tristan. All right, let's continue. So the language trinity, it means that there is a similar template for all languages, human languages. The first one is syntax. Syntax is the structure. So we have the subject and the predicate. The predicate is a verb and an object. Structure must be respected in order for communication, in order for language to exist. And sometimes it's finicky and it's very nuanced. One example is a comma can render a completely let's eat comma grandma, or let's eat grandma. So these are completely different meanings. Children, they make very good use of the syntactic structure and also grammatic structure. So they extrapolate to things that are not acceptably used. They have very funny mistakes. I can't, will go today. It makes sense. You understand what the child wants to say, and it's a wrong extrapolation to the right structure. What are you eating? It, or you are a grown up, I am a grown down. It makes sense because it's a literary use of syntactic and grammatic structure. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. It's perfectly syntactic wise, but it has no meaning. So syntax is a must, but it's not sufficient. Semantics is the right use of the meaning. It's the opposite from those of the children's mistakes. So these, the building blocks have semantics in themselves, but we have no meaning to this. And pragmatics, this is a big one. And this is for communication between people. And only for communication between people. And that excludes philosophers. Philosophers, they, for, I think, historical arrogant reasons, they decided that pragmatics is for wimps. But maybe later I'll give some examples. But for human communication, pragmatics is a must. And I'll give some examples. When we don't have, when we have structure, we have syntax, we have semantics without pragmatics. Probably most of miscommunications is about it. Within pragmatics, we'll see soon, is not only you have to, pragmatics is anchored on the main message and the listener, the audience. We'll see it soon. So the basic form of syntax: subject, verb, object, agent, change, thing that happens. So and that, so many times it's said that language is action-based, that everything is about action, is about something that happens a long time. But we know also that we can express things without action, definitions without time. And so maybe instead of action, we could say connection. So language, as I said before, is the clearest expression of our need. I don't think that I cannot imagine one example of human existence without this basic organization of the word, which is the definition of unitary pieces of knowledge, of ideas, of something that is in itself, and the connection between them. And that's prediction, that's control, okay. So we can have syntactically valid sentences, like the example I gave before. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. So this would be the outer rectangle. We can have meaningful sentences that don't have, that are not pragmatic, they don't communicate well, and communication only occurs with the three sine qua non: syntax, semantics, and pragmatics, okay? So German philosophers, especially, but others too, I don't know, it's like, it's different from other in humanities. Historians, this is the department that takes writing most seriously. Everything is communication, and a BA in history, students learn how to write. It's the best school for writing. And they are neighbors in the same corridor, the philosophers. I don't know why. They say, no, the more cryptic, the better. So it's like... so Noam Chomsky, Avram Noam Chomsky, he's now probably the most famous linguistic, is Noam Chomsky. He's now 92 years old. He's emeritus professor from MIT. And he's a very, very controversial political activist. I'm sure that you heard about him. He's nowadays more famous for his political activism than for his original academic work in linguistics, which was mostly published, the main part, the basic part, in the 50s and the 60s. And it's still probably the canon of linguistics. I don't know if people in linguistics still see it that way, but at least for us, it's the... So the main thing that he said is that all languages are the same. They have the same structure. And that that we have sentences, and they have these subject, predicate, form, verb, and object, and that we humans, and I don't know about this, but that's his claim, and that's an accepted claim, that we humans are uniquely, innately born with a language acquisition system. We are born with a system that is mostly active in our early years, that that acquires language in its linguistic form like a sponge. And we cannot run away from that. So this argument of his came as a kind, I don't know, as a counter argument, but it opposed the behaviorism, or the classic Skinner-based behaviorism of stimulus and response, and we don't deal with the black box inside, meaning that human behavior can be fully explained by learning, by experience, by connecting, by associating events and the relationship between factors and events. And that's how the entire spectrum of human behavior can be explained. So Chomsky, or in English Chomsky, claimed that no, learning cannot explain many things that we observe, especially in children. So therefore, and it's much richer than that, obviously. So he suggested that humans are born with this machinery of learning. And children's mistakes are one example. So these extrapolations of theirs, they can build messages that sounds not plausible that they learn somewhere. A child never heard the green kangaroo, but a child can imagine that. I personally don't know, because these basic rules, they also can be learned. But again, I don't think I am entitled to give a valid argument. I don't know enough about his writings and his argument. But in Hebrew, these kind of mistakes, they are more apparent, because Hebrew, or Semitic languages in general, they are much more structured. Their grammatical structure is much more obvious. Verbs, they have 7 different buildings, and even adults, when they learn Hebrew or Arabic, they can build things that are logic but don't exist. 3-4 years old Hebrew-speaking children, they are crazily funny in the way they build, they communicate. Okay, so I don't know if you heard about Zipf's law, who was a German thinker, and this is a general law. It sounds almost obvious, but it works. It's an empirical law that states that, surprisingly, for many, I don't know if most, but so many types of empirical things of data that we observe in our human surroundings, even physical. So in social science, it's there all the time. And he states that, and this law, this observation, is that rank and frequency, they are inversely related. So so for words, for instance, in English, the most used word in English is apparently is the, okay, the article the, which is 7% of all words that appear in communication. It's the. So the is the first ranked word in English. The second ranked word is and it appears 3.5% of the time in communication. And then I, which appears theoretically 1.72. So the first word, the first rank, appears twice as much as the second, which appears twice as much as the third, etc. So what you see here is the frequency and rank of the words in Romeo and Juliet, the translation to the translates. No, it was not translated, it was written in English. And you can see this inverse relationship. Why is it interesting? Because most of the words that we use are a very small set of words. So in English, the 100 most frequent words make up half of our communication. Half of our communication uses only the 100 most frequent words. That's crazy when you think about it. It is. It's really surprising. And if you, I don't know how to do it, but if you build a word cloud, you will see it. It's very few words that they are all the time used. And that goes back to the sparseness of human language. Duolingo is the app for learning language, irrespective of the part of the training and the motivation and the tricks that work for most people with feelings. It's surprising how fast you can start to dabble in a completely new language by learning a very restricted vocabulary. Because if you learn the most frequent words, most of the communication is accessible. On top of that, you have, as Chomsky suggested, very similar, if not identical, basic structure, the syntax, even if the order of the agents can vary across languages. German is probably the most, do you have any German speaker here, student? Gibt es eine deutsch sprechende Studentin hier? Ja, Katharina, sprichst du Deutsch? So, Katharina, could you explain to us? Kannst du sagen mit wir? Ja, ein bisschen.
Ein bisschen.
So explain to us the order in German.
Okay, let me write something down. So you usually put the verb at the end. So you'll put like the pronoun and then ich, so in past tense. So like if I said I did speak German, it would be ich habe Deutsch gesprochen. Instead of I spoke German, it's I have German spoken. And then
in the middle, you can have an entire story.
Yeah.
Ich habe während meiner Kindheit mit meinen Eltern nur Deutsch sprachen.
Yeah.
You understood what I said?
Yeah, I don't know how to say it in English. Like you can have a really long paragraph and the verb will still go at the end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what I said is during my childhood with my parents, only German spoke. So and the sentence can be endless. So for us English speakers, German can be crazily cryptic because of the order, but the basic structure is identical, which is subject, verb, and the other parts of the predicate. I have only good, maybe good accent in German. I speak horribly well. My when I was a child, everybody spoke German when they didn't want us to understand. And in the end, I understand, but I speak horribly. Okay, so let's go back to the basic forms of communication, pragmatism. So you all know it, right? Buffalo, 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 buffalo. Buffalo, 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 buffalo. This is a valid and meaningful sentence. So, but it's not pragmatic. The idea is that there are other words that you can use, police, and it works. So, let me show you that if you change the various alternative meanings of the word buffalo, if it's a verb, if it's a city, if it's an animal, this sentence is perfectly valid in terms of grammatics, in terms of syntax and meaning, but it's hardly communicative because it's not, it violates pragmatics. So the basics of pragmatics was suggested by the Gratian maxims. And so you can pay more attention now. This is very important for your EDM. And these maxims are what's called the necessity, the condition for meaningful communication is called the cooperative principle. First of all, there must be an anchor to the veracity of your information. Your information, your meaning, your message must be perceived as having some anchor on truth, or at least the intent of truth. It's, in other words, don't lie or try to, or if you lie or if you are perceived as lying, you are violating pragmatics. Makes sense, right? Quantity. So, and again, for your EDM, you shall convey all the necessary information for your message to be understood, but not more than the necessary information. If you ask an Israeli or a German, how are you doing? You shall hear how the person is doing. In America, when you ask, how are you doing? The message is completely different, is hi. You never answer, how are you doing? Oh yes, So that's pragmatics, and it depends on the audience. You must understand with whom you're talking. So in science, the first thing that you have to understand the scope of your audience is whether who will read your paper are people from your very specific subfield, and it depends on the journal you're trying to publish, or even the general message, the bottom line message of your paper. It's different audience. So people that know all you know from your field, you will not start explaining things that they know. On the other hand, the price is that people outside it, your field, will not be able to understand. So you must know your audience. And the quantity must be tailored to your audience. And in your idiom, you must follow this rule. You must explain everything that is necessary for the reader to understand what you did, but not more than the necessary. Sometimes in the discussion part, only then you can dare to extrapolate and to speculate and break the rule of all the necessary, but only the necessary, in order to make it either more interesting or cover some assumptions that are very critical for your message, or account for narratives or evidence in the literature that doesn't match exactly what you're telling. So pragmatics depends on culture, on time, on age, depends on the people, the person you're talking to. Ambiguity and obscurity, I even don't have to explain, right? So sometimes these maxims can and are violated within very specific contexts that are taken for granted. When we tell jokes, we obviously tell, and it's assumed, the listener assumes that it's not a true story. The Linda problem, you know, everybody knows the Linda problem. Is it something that all students know? So I'll tell it. So this is part. Okay, so this is part of one of the most famous part of the work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, that received two very important psychologists in our field, decision-making and all the heuristics, and they received a Nobel in economics for their work in decision-making. So they described common heuristics, the way some distortions that we have from our logical thinking. So this is one of the examples they have used. Not only an example, this is an actual. So they asked, so they took the participants and they described a person, Linda. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Then they were asked which one is most probable, is more probable. One, Linda is a bank teller, or Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Okay, I want to see in the chat, one or two. Which one is more probable? That Linda is a bank teller, or Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement? Please play with me. Use the chat. One, bank teller. One. Yeah, you guys know it. Okay. Okay, so 80% of their participants, yeah, this is old stuff. You guys are smarter. 80% of the participants and people that not students of psychology will answer B, that Linda is a bank teller and a feminist. And it doesn't make sense because probabilistically, there are more options. The second one is a subset of the first one. So it's much more probable that she is a bank teller. Right? Anyone doesn't understand it? It's called the junction fallacy. And why do we do it? Linguistics can explain it because we assume as the audition, we assume the maxim of relation. We assume that everything in the message, in the story, is pertinent, is relevant. There is nothing here that was not part of the bottom line message. So if we were told that Linda is an activist and all this stuff, it's because this is necessary for the bottom line. And that's why we intuitively feel that she's probably a feminist, not only a bank teller. Okay, this is we are moving to a more dry and unfamiliar question, more deep into the cognition. How the building blocks of language is organized in our system, not in our brain, in our system. How much time do I have? 10 minutes? Yes, okay, I'll run with that. So I'll run with that. So it's not alphabetical. My mother is alphabetical. When she doesn't remember a word, it's crazy. When she doesn't remember a word, she does like this with the A, B, C, D, and she remembers it always. Well, when my mother is crazy. Okay, but most human beings, it's not alphabetical. So so it's commonly defined that the smallest building block of words, of messages, of concepts is it's a morpheme. So unthinkable, it's three morphemes: un, not, think, thinking, able, possible, to. Okay, and phonemes are the sounds. The smallest units of sounds. So one way that how our mind is, one way to assess the organization of words, the mental lexicon organization, is to ask participants, and we give them a word, and they have to react whether it's meaningful or not. So steal, crest, pref, drape. So people react faster to meaningful words. Another way is by priming. So we give a prime, a word, and then they have to react to the target word, and they respond faster if there is a semantic connection between the two words, which means that apparently our lexicon mental organization is frequency and semantic most of all, unlike my mother. I'm going to jump. It's interesting, but it's not the main thing. Okay. The connection between the way we perceive the world, the way we think, cause or consequence. It seems to us that language follows the general form that we have in other ways we organize knowledge. A function is an agent that a procedure is applied and we have a result. So just like in physics, in computer science, language, it seems to follow the same idea. Which one is the oldest? Most of us would say the young professor is older. Why? Because we implicitly understand that the adjective belongs to the main character of our story, to the professor, which their range of ages is older than the students. We implicitly understand that. This is important. The Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis from before World War II. So the strong version is that we can, so if we can talk about it, if we cannot talk about it, we cannot think about it. And therefore, language forms thought and perception and cognition and reality in general. And that's one of the reasons why the field of linguistics is so intensely, more than any other field in psychology, intensely permeated, infested by people with very strong ideological agendas. They fight a lot. So the strong version implies determinism, that language, the way we organize our language, determines our perception of reality. The weak version would be that the way our language organizes influences our thought and decisions, and the question that remains is which one is the chicken and which one is the egg, and why not an iterative relationship, meaning it causes and it's a consequence without a beginning and an end. So one of the common examples against the strong form, the strong version, is that the people from anthropology, they find all communities with very different set of vocabulary for a given concept. For instance, a culture with very few color names, they still can perceive color just as well. Another example is, Schadenfreude is nowadays in English, most people know what it means because it's used in English. It means joy from the suffering or lack of luck of another person. So this word exists in German, but it doesn't exist in English, or at least, let's say, before English started to adopt it. But it doesn't mean that English-speaking people never felt the same feeling of joy when someone has a mishap. On the other hand, it seems that Chinese scholars, they learn to count faster than non-Chinese school students, because the way in Chinese, and correct me if someone here knows about it better, that in Chinese the counting is more intuitively organized. So in English, when we finish 1 to 10, we have 11, 12, we have between 0 and 20, we have 19 different units. While in Chinese, we have 10, and then 10 again. As in English, we continue to repeat after 20. The worst case scenario is in French. In French is 1 to 60, and then 69, and then 60, 11, 12, 60, 19 is 79, and then 80 is 80, 4 20s, and then 4 20s 1 is 81, and then 91 is 4 20 11, 99 is 4 20 19 100. I don't know if French children if it takes longer, but for Chinese,
in Belgium, it's completely different. It's like French also, but the numbers are different. Only for 90, for 70 and 90, you say 70 and 90, because of like that math that is like so incomprehensible.
In Belgium, you said?
Like in Belgium, you also speak French, and the only difference is like these two numbers for 70 and 90 that are not said in the same way as in France.
So Maya, I understand, since you said in Belgium they also speak French, I understand that you are from the south and you're not Flemish.
Well, I am French, but I lived in Belgium.
Yeah, well, many Belgians would cringe when you and many don't speak French. I didn't know that 90 and 70.
Yeah, 70 for 70 and 90 for 90.
So you guys probably learn how to count faster than French. Not you guys,
yeah.
like.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another example is the myth is that Eskimos and Scandinavians, they have dozens of words for different colors of snow. It's not exactly, apparently it's not only snow, it's also ice. It's much more complex. Does it mean that these cultures are more sophisticated? No, it doesn't. Obviously, not obviously, but it's a question that has been raised. And one of the answers is that it's not unitary, separate, distinct. When we talked about discreteness, these are not discrete concepts. They are only combinations of smaller building blocks. For instance, in German, this agglutination is very frequent, much more than in English. So for snow, there are endless different words, but they are all Schnee like alt is old, neu, fern, nass is wet. So these are two words that exist. They are combined into one word. It doesn't mean that German-speaking people have a more complex representation of the word, which a superficial appraisal of their vocabulary would perhaps suggest. We are done in time. Questions? Chinese counting is more systematic. You can literally derive any number following the single rule. May, tell us about the single rule. What is the single rule?
Yeah, basically it's almost like when we count, when we get to like, let's say, when you say 11, it's not 11, it's 10, 1. And then when you say like 50, it's like 5, 10. So basically you're actually symbolically representing that in mind, the value itself, not just the name, which, you know, if there's like a lot of research on why schoolers in Asian countries actually kind of like do math better, right? There is some kind of connection there too, but overall the variance isn't as large.
Okay, so you know about this empirical evidence about faster learning in China?
Yeah, there is in terms of like mathematics, especially that kind. Well, but then there's also other, because they started earlier with more complex ideas and there were more practice. So yeah, there is a trend, but the actual cause of why math performance is higher isn't due to a single factor, which is, you know, the language system.
Yeah, yes, and the interpretation is a hindsight correlation, meaning that we can never know the amount, the number, and the strength of endless possible mediators to the observation that children in China arrive to a faster to a given level of knowledge in mathematics, because it's ethically impossible to have a controlled experiment. The only way to do it would be to have two very similar children growing up in the exact same environment and teaching one mathematics in Chinese and the other one mathematics in another language, and then see how fast each one arrives. And then you cannot do it with only one, because even if they are identical twins, the system ontological express itself different. Then you have to have a lot of different children that are very similar and then have this control. This is ethically impossible. I don't know what I'm talking about, but it's hindsight correlation interpretation. But it's an interesting one. It's a fact that they achieve faster. So Tristan, yes, let's see. If you find something, let me know, and I'll think about it. I'll look for your question, because I agree from the five principles, arbitrariness intuitively, even though they are described as observations. So we have arbitrariness, productivity, regularity. Well, productivity is a result. Regularity is also an observation. Discreteness, also displacement, is a result. So we have three: arbitrariness, regularity, and discreteness. And arbitrariness, we feel like, why? Let's think about it.
I'll look for some stuff. I have some evolution sources about it.
If you find something, please let me know.
I will have it generally about language, but I will look.